Okay, so basically I saw that a group filed a lawsuit against Harvard over legacy admissions. Um Now, I think that this is fair. I think that this is practical because if you're going to take away affirmative action, you should also take away legacy admissions. Like, if you want to have a merit based society. But the thing about institutions like Harvard and Princeton and really all the other Ivy League schools is it's actually not about merit. There's this idea that it's about merit because there are some people on campus who are like actually the smartest people in the country, but it isn't all of them and it isn't most of the people. Most of the people in those spaces are rich. That's it. Like those they're Ivy League schools because of like the Pac-10 sports teams. And a lot of the money that goes to the schools is just going to sports teams. I think some of you who don't know what the Ivy League is, you should actually just go look that up. And I mean, if you think about it, the University of California actually has a very, very large endowments in terms of like research grant, like grant funding. The government gives those schools like anyone can apply for like the United States of America, like is it called NES fund? It's like the STEM fund if you have patentable ideas, right? And the people who hold PhDs and who are research scientists are going to create technology, right, that is beneficial to America. And so they learn the skills and harness those skills at American universities like a lot of the universities of California, but also places like Harvard and Stanford. So, like, you need a combination in places like that. You need a combination of really smart people and really rich people. Like, the rich people fund the smart people. And so, and the other thing about legacy admission and really tradition, which I feel like some people don't respect, like, um, those places like Harvard and Princeton, Yale, they're like, old boys clubs. I've made other videos about this, but like, I think some of you are just too far removed from what it's like being on those campuses. American colleges, PWI specifically, or primarily white institutions, are just that. Like, they're primarily white. And all over the world, except for in Africa and the black parts of Africa, all the colleges are like that. Like getting an education is something that has been reserved for Europeans, and that's just how it is because like wealth is racialized globally, and that's not something to take in a joking way or to think like what you can do with education is kind of a lot, which is why like some of the stuff that's happening with like YouTube specifically, where you have black women creating video essays that are racialized and gendered, is something we have never actually seen on planet Earth. Like this is the first time in history that we've seen that, and it's crazy because like black women can actually talk to each other from all over the world and kind of talk about policies, money, parentage, motherhood, sex, relationships, music, really everything. We can like actually talk to each other where we could not do that before because like communication and technology has been reserved for the elite. It just has. Now, another thing that's very strange about this is I don't understand why people would want to get rid of these. Like, why? I really wonder, like, why are people trying to go to Harvard and Stanford and, like, well, Stanford's not an Ivy League school, but whatever the other Ivies are, Princeton, Yale, like, why are you so concerned about going there? I really have questions. Like, I think so many people are just like under this belief that like simply them going to these institutions is going to like give them clout that they didn't have before. It's like, man, these brands of like American collegiate spaces have really brainwashed some people into believing that like your only life chance is like the college that you attend or something. And don't get me wrong, I do think that like having if you are academically very gifted, and you are interested in a particular subject, and there's a researcher on a particular campus who is also like very knowledgeable about that subject, and you're like, I want to go study with them for this reason, I get it. But like a lot of the best researchers are publishing their work, so you could just read it. You could send them an email and ask them questions about stuff. You can go to conferences and talk to them. Like, you don't have to go to like Harvard or Stanford or Yale or Princeton or any of those places in order to basically like be educated, okay? Like, if you're not rich, I think you should just like be okay with the fact that like you're not rich. And you might like never be rich, and like that's not you. If you aren't a legacy kid, I don't think that you should like sit online and be a hater basically for like legacy admissions. And I think you just have to kind of like deal with the fact, and I've said this before, that some people will have more. They just will, because they start where you start matters. That's why I made those videos about Kerry Washington, because so few black people have anything at all, especially like educational experiences. So people just think people think that Kerry Washington grew up like Kerry Washington's middle class. They think it's the same as like somebody in New York or something. How can you say it? Like, the best way I can put it is, maybe I'll make more content about Gossip Girl and like elitism. I've made some content about it already, but I can make more, because clearly like nobody else is covering it. But like, man, like Kerry Washington grew up poor. Like, Gabrielle Union might have grown up more poor than Kerry Washington, and then Jada Pinkett might have grown up even more poor than Kerry Washington and like Gabrielle Union, but they're all like poor. Like, the middle class poor people are large and in between. The only person who maybe like who had an upper middle class experience might have been Beyonce. Like, Beyonce had, I would say, like a pretty standard middle class experience. Or I would say, who had an upper class experience? Janet fucking Jackson. Janet Jackson is like a really good example of like a black person who's had just all the privilege. Like Janet Jackson, really wonderful, perfect example of like nepotism, elitism, just all the things. Or Yara Shahidi, another like really good example. Actually, Yara Shahidi is a really good example of growing up extremely middle class, upper middle class even. Really good example of that. And both of those, you can kind of unpack all of the levels between that, but like everyone there that I mentioned had a very different experience. So like, someone like Kerry Washington, having grown up in New York, which New York is just a city and a state that has a lot more access. It's like faster paced. It's like the most advanced city maybe outside of California in the world, not like in the world. Like, it's like the richest people in the world live in like New York, and Kerry Washington is kind of like brushing shoulders with some of those people and the children of those people, simply because of like institutions that she went to, like places that she has been, right? Now, for someone like Beyonce, she actually grew up in like Houston, Texas, which is the South. The South has been like racially segregated for a very long time, and even the wealthiest people in the South don't have the same money as the people in New York, on average. And also the South is very white and black. So like Beyonce had a very black experience growing, like a very black American experience, and she didn't really have other things to compare it to. So everything you hear her talking about is coming from this place of her growing up really in this like segregated space, and having this really particular black, like middle class experience in the South. Like, and I've said this before, that one of the reasons I moved to the South is because it's cheaper. Like, living in the South is cheaper than living in New York or California. It just is. You can buy more shit with your money. You can. It's cheap out here. It's cheap. So, I mean, that's what Beyonce is singing about. And it's not a bad thing, because like cheap in Houston is still not like poverty in Africa. So she's middle class, is not no class. I don't know. Let the legacy kids have their shit, is the point of this, but like that's a real thing. And I don't know why we keep pretending like it's something else. Like, people are going to have and keep their shit, and that's the really strange part about it. Like, everyone isn't going to be Issa Rae. Everyone isn't going to be me. Everyone's not going to be like whoever. I saw something, Mahalia posted something, which I think is kind of interesting. We could talk about this actually, and I'll make another video where I talk about this. But like, man, like there's only a certain amount of spots, is what I'm trying to say. Like, society is functioning on a certain amount of spots, and people are working and competing for those particular spots. Some people are just creating lanes for themselves. Like social media is this really interesting place where you can like create a space for yourself and like monetize yourself, which is very cool. Like we haven't seen that before. Just especially it's been very difficult for black women specifically, where you have like beauty brands and all these things who just have not spent money on, man, like black models, black artists, designers, all of these things, when the entire society, really, a very large swath of money being spent in America has been spent on cosmetics and beauty for black women. So it is very strange to have like so little representation. We're seeing more now, but for a while we had quite like basically none. Anyway, where else was I going with this? Yeah, we need to let the legacy kids have their legacy. And I wonder, like, if we can read the article together, maybe another night. I don't feel like doing it tonight. But I'll put the article that I read in the description box. And, comment below if you actually have thoughts. Thoughts about legacy admissions.